past few weeks, questions about the future viability of European Union integration have come to the fore once again. These questions are certainly not new. Over the past 15 years, the EU has faced several and severe crises which threatened its own existence, and yet it was able to show that it could survive them. So, how come that the European Union could hold it together in the face of multiple crises? Unlike nation states, it has no single government, no single people, and no fixed borders. So how and why has the EU not fallen apart in the face of this sequence of consecutive crises? Hello, I am 𝘉𝘰𝘶 Carella, Research Fellow at the University of Milan, and we are here today at the Feltrinelli Foundation in Milan to speak with Maurizio Ferrera, Professor at the University of Milan and one of the principal investigators, together with Professors 𝘕𝘰𝘁𝘁 and 𝘉𝘪𝘯𝘥𝘪𝘯 of the SOLID project founded by the European Research Council. In this first video, we will introduce you to the theoretical framework used in SOLID and the main concepts and mechanisms that help explain the resilience of the EU as a polity. So let's start with the basics. Maurizio, how can we describe the theoretical framework in SOLID and the main concepts and theories that have been used in our research?
Thank you, Beatrice. Our work is inspired by the classical state-building tradition, and in particular the works by Steinrocken and Albert Hirschman. And what we have done to begin with is to revise and generalize the concepts originally introduced by them and also their theoretical propositions, with a view to applying them to any polity and not just the nation state, which was the focus of inquiry of Rocken and Hirschman. So we define polity as a political space which is demarcated against and outside by borders, or boundaries, better, a space which is endowed with an internal authority structure that can take binding decisions, and a set of bonds of loyalty, bonds of togetherness between the various constituent units. Now, the EU is a polity in this sense, or a particular variant of polity, and we define it as a compound polity of nation states, which are the constituent parts, or alternatively as a union of welfare democracies, which are committed to fulfilling the prosperity and social security expectations of their citizens. And once we've given this definition, then we focus on the endogenous dynamics which have driven the development of the EU as a polity. And we start again from the basic idea that the establishment of boundaries have encouraged the internal actor of the EU polity to shift their attention towards the territorial center, the polity center, in order to address their demands and grievances, including the demand of establishing new bottom-up channels of voice. And the development of the EU, or the formation of the EU polity, has resulted from a kind of balancing act between the, let's say, the wish to use the EU as an instrument for enhancing the collective power and also the individual power of the member states, without, let's say, eroding or challenging the political and institutional foundations of each member state as a national polity. So this balancing act has been a very laborious operation through time, which has implied a, I would say, almost constant recalibration of what we call the 3Bs: boundaries, binding authority, and bonds. And that precisely because of this need to balance, the overall result has been a system of relatively fluid and porous boundaries, a relatively weak center, together with a dispersed authority network centered on the national capitals, and thin bonds of loyalty and reciprocity, and a low level of, let's say, togetherness. This has, however, not prevented the EU to move forward, even though, structurally speaking, this configuration of the 3Bs has remained a source of fragility. It has made it more fragile than a unitary or federal, in the strong sense of the word, polity. But paradoxically, given the intensity of the tensions, it has also proved, this configuration, to be a source of resilience.
Thank you, Maurizio. So the EU, according to solid framework, is a polity. And as such, it can be analyzed in its three constitutive elements. And as you were saying, there are certain aspects of boundaries, binding authority, and bonds of loyalty characterizing the European Union that are specific to the EU as a polity, and as such, it distinguishes them from other types of policies like nation states or federal states. So now that we have acquired the theoretical toolkit of the solid projects, and also in light of the empirical evidence that we have collected and analyzed, I would like to ask you what have been the strategies used at the European Union level to survive the crisis, the existential crisis that the EU had faced over the past years. And of course, this is an important question in these very weeks in the context of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war.
Yes, sure. Now, the intensity of the shocks, which started with the financial crisis and the sovereign debt crisis in the early 2010s, has required the deployment of relatively huge and incisive policy measure at the EU level, which have, had quite substantial impacts on the political economy of the member states and on the, on the shoulders of ordinary citizens. So the responses have originated, quite understandably, a process of, we call it policy politicization, an expansion of conflict and of actors involved in conflict. And in some junctures, this process of politicization has shifted from the level of the policy, say, how to respond to the fiscal crisis, to the polity level. I mean, shall we keep the EU polity together, or shall we challenge its very existence? And we call polity politicization precisely the process whereby certain actors and certain, challengers put in question either the whole set of the Bs of the EU, or at least one of them. like the configuration of the boundaries, think of the problem of migration, or the validity of EU authority. So this, we believe, has been the key challenge during the sequence of crises: how to handle, how to face and manage the escalation from policy to polity crisis. And of course, it was relatively new for EU leaders, so a number of strategies have to be invented from scratch. And we have noted, we have tried to isolate some of these strategies. For example, take the refugee crisis, which hit the European Union in the wake of the Syrian crisis. Well, at that moment, the policy of the EU was, we have to share the burdens of this influx of migrants, and then certain countries refused to even comply with some decisions that had been taken by qualified majority voting, so it was not possible to actually implement the authority of the EU, quite a significant challenge to the survival of the polity as such. And in that case, the strategy was found in externalizing the conflict with an agreement with Turkey, whereby, through a quite substantial financial compensation, the Ankara government has accepted to keep a quite significant number of refugees within the territory of Turkey. Again, similar controversies have emerged later on during the pandemic, for example, with an initial, let's say, unreadiness of the national governments to display solidarity vis-à-vis those member states which had been hit hardest by, or earlier, by the pandemic. And there, the strategy that was, let's say, deployed was essentially, let's say, discursive or rhetoric. Leaders mobilized their political credit in order to justify the need for a collective sacrifice, even funded by common debt. And believe it or not, the national leader that was more engaged in this type of polity-level justification was Angela Merkel, who had always been against the idea of a common European debt. There have been other strategies of response, as they will become more clear, I think, in the specific videos dedicated to the various crises.
Thank you, Maurizio, for helping us summarize the theoretical backbone of the SOLID project and the main concepts and theories that we've used in our research, which shed light on some of the perhaps counterintuitive strengths of a polity that is inherently crisis-prone and fragile. Also, the focus on crisis has proved to be a useful lens to understand the EU polity formation and resilience over time. So please have a look at our video series where each of video is dedicated to a specific crisis, and go have a look also at our social media pages and our open access publication. We look forward to engaging with you and hearing your feedback. Thank you very much for your attention.